Welcome to Bitcoin Fixes This, where we explore the impact that Bitcoin will have in all aspects of society. Today's guest is Cory Klippsten, CEO of Swan Bitcoin. We talk about his path from broadcast journalism, consulting, to venture capital. Cory also tells us about how he went from managing an altcoin fund to becoming a Bitcoin Maximalist. Cory Klippsten, how's everything going, man?
Man, out here on the battlefield.
You feel like you're at war? Is that what you're saying?
It's felt like that for the last 2 months or so, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we have some significant adversaries, and just glad to be doing my part.
Well, so it is interesting because you've been abnormally prescient in sort of seeing this stuff coming. But before we get to all of that, let's talk about your backstory. Because I find this part kind of fascinating because, I mean, you weren't always the Bitcoin maximalist that you are now. So,
no, it's your fault, Jimmy.
Well, before we get to that, let's talk about your background. Where are you coming from? What's your story? What's your Bitcoin origin story?
Sure. I mean, I can go way back, and then I think it actually is kind of interesting, even though all paths lead to Bitcoin, everybody's path is different. So I grew up in Northern Cali and then Seattle. The interesting tweak there is my parents met on Haight-Ashbury, even though they're like nice Midwestern people that went to college and everything. So they were like spiritual seeking hippies. So I was basically raised on and off of a commune, with like meditation, yoga, service, vegetarianism, and all that, in the late 70s and early 80s before going to Seattle. So I often joke when I got to public school in Seattle in 5th grade, I was essentially like an immigrant to this country. So I just think that's kind of a funny little foundational story that's made me maybe slightly more observant, but also, although altcoiners may not agree, actually more empathetic than a lot of other people, because I had that sort of outsider's beginning, even though I'm like a 6'4", blonde-haired, blue-eyed, wasp-looking dude. I've always been a little bit more comfortable mixing with people from other backgrounds because I felt like that. So that's kind of interesting. I actually started out in journalism. I did the paper all through high school. I was convinced I wanted to be a broadcast journalist. I went to University of Missouri, dead set on being on CNN or ESPN, and I tried it. I got on the local NBC station as a junior. So I did about a year of local news and sports reporting and anchoring the Today Show morning cut-ins at like the 25 and the 55 with a pencil-necked 19-year-old in an ill-fitting suit with my neck sticking out of there. I am not the boom goes the dynamite guy. That was another guy. So that was fun. But it was late 90s. I didn't like it. I actually really wasn't enjoying TV. It wasn't what I thought it would be. And, then you find out that you don't really get paid well for 20 years or something as a guy post-college, and the internet was blowing up. I'd been online since 93 or something like that. And that just started to suck up more and more of my attention, kind of like Bitcoin does now. So instead I went to Microsoft, interned there in Redmond in 98, went to work for them full-time in New York in 99. And the next, 15 years was just mostly working for big companies. And like, I was still kind of stuck in if you keep on putting good things on your resume and, choose the jobs that everybody else wants, then, like things will work out. And it was weird. It leaked out. Like the things that actually like brought me joy leaked out. And that's why I was probably, a functioning alcoholic from like 18 to 32, is because I wasn't getting any sort of fulfillment from my daytime pursuits. But I worked for Microsoft, Morgan Stanley, McKinsey and Company, the management consulting firm, and then eventually Google. And got an MBA, finance and entrepreneurship at University of Chicago in 2004. Did a lot of stats work while I was there. That's kind of usually been my favorite subject. So you can imagine why I like to see stats work done well, even though it's been a while since I practiced. And yeah, I think the other thread that I think is kind of interesting to pull at is I was in online in New York, which was, maybe the second epicenter of the .com boom and bust, and probably had a worse bust in percentage terms as far as all the companies there really going to zero. Whereas there were still some remnants of things in Seattle and the Bay Area that continued. Almost everything went to zero in New York. And I think that made me want to go to business school and work in more traditional things because I was upset that the sand had shifted beneath my feet and it didn't feel like it was my fault in the dot-com bust. And then when the global financial crisis rolled around, I'm sitting here working in management consulting and it's happening again. And I'm like, man, it's all bullshit. Really? And so the only thing I felt like, okay, the only way I'm going to be able to like not keep on having this sense of sort of insecurity with these companies is I've got to be much more early stage where I have a lot more control. It's kind of, I just want to bet on myself. So at that point, I think it was 2009 or 2010, I decided that, okay, I'm definitely going to work in early stage startups. Couldn't figure out how to get there from here. Only companies that wanted to hire me was like Series E startups, putting me in a VP strategy role, which sounded like more of the same. So I went to Google basically as internet business school and used that to network like crazy with founders and VCs. Met probably 1,000 people in a couple of years, leveraging the google.com email address and the LinkedIn. And yeah, by 2013, I moved after getting married. We moved out to LA, and it was really probably for proximity to SF that I did that, because I would just start going up, every week, every other week, sometimes 2 or 3 times in a week, and just doing the startup advising thing, cutting angel checks, and just kind of dipping my toes in that. I left Google summer of 13, and I've been in startups full time for the last 9 years. Invested in over 50 companies, advised a bunch, probably 20 or 30 of them, always doing like strategy and fundraising stuff with venture-backed CEOs. And, it's been a really good run. It was a good run basically this whole time. And then Bitcoin, after 2 swings and misses, finally got my attention in the price run up in spring of 17. And, like a lot of people whose frame of reference was tech and Silicon Valley, and you're used to taking the advice of Andreessen Horowitz and Union Square Ventures. And, they're all saying that there's this amazing, innovative boom going on in ICO land. And, they weren't calling them friction tokens at the time. Every marketplace was supposed to have its own token. And I had this like 50-page document that was like the foundation of this friction token fund that I was going to start targeting all these marketplaces, that were like Series C, Series D, Silicon Valley companies. Like, I had all these big plans, and, it just get caught up in the price run up and all these ICOs. And then I started consulting for BlockV, which was the guys that actually initially started Tether, had done, sort of like an early proto NFT startup. And it's like, sometimes the signals are just like off, because they had like a really good, capable team, serious people that had success outside of crypto. And like, it just it was hard to poke through it and be like, oh wait, this is all bullshit. Like you couldn't see it right away. And then, okay, so do we get to the Jimmy story now? Cause this is where we are.
Wait, no. Let's go back, cause you covered a whole ton of stuff.
Okay.
And I want to explore that. And you were saying during your story, there's a lot of threads to pull on there. So one pattern that I'm kind of seeing with your career is that you kind of have a really good nose for bullshit, which is honestly kind of rare. And, even like your foray into broadcast journalism and stuff, and like kind of seeing, okay, well, it's not what I thought it was, and sort of like being dissatisfied with that. And then going into this very large corporate environment with many different companies, probably some of the best jobs that, anyone from college, any college graduate from that time wanted. I mean, you've had all of them, and yet it was unsatisfactory. Tell me more about that. Why were these sort of like not what you thought what they were, and what was so dissatisfying about these jobs?
Well, I think we can tell this just through the story of Google, because that was kind of the last gasp. I was like, okay, if I'm going to try big companies one more time, because after leaving McKinsey, I actually started my own private equity consulting firm and had like a nice run during the tail end of the bubble there from like 06 to 08. And so going to Google for me it was actually the first time that I was strategic about a career move, because I did see it as a way to get into startups potentially. But I also, option B was, this is the company that everybody says is the best big company to work for. It has this amazing culture. It's not being evil and all this stuff. The perks are amazing. The people are actually pretty spectacular. So if I don't like it at Google, then I know I'm done with big companies. And that ended up being the case. Like, I did good work there and I did some cool shit and there were some good people around and I still felt like insanely constrained. And you're just artificially put into a weird rat race, because if you have invented before Bitcoin the best product in the history of the world, which is search, basically, and the way they monetize is just like the most incredible product, it makes no sense to put anybody in a role unless they do that role perfectly. Overpay slightly for everybody and make sure they do their role perfectly. So what you end up with at Google, at least in that time, I don't know what it's like now, because obviously there's a lot more companies with shine on them now. But back then, everybody was overqualified for their job at every level. And so it created this sort of like weird competition of like, to move up, I mean, you had to be doing like the work of like 6 people. And then it also became super political to move up or get to work on interesting things. And I could do all that. And I did, but I don't like it. That's not how I want to spend my time, is like strategizing about like how many hugs to give at a happy hour. And like what's the right number of smiley faces at the end of your emails.
Well, I mean, did you experience that in the previous companies as well? Because like that for me is like, it just sounds so miserable, like figuring out what the right political play is within a company.
No, I'd say out of like comparing those 4 companies, like Google was by far the most sort of rigid in its culture of conformity.
What sort of conformity did they expect? I
would say it was, just being like sature and sweet all the time, basically. It was extremely feminine. The culture and just the vibe and everything was like over the top. Like just, it felt weird being a guy there.
Isn't it mostly men, at least in engineering and stuff?
Yeah, I was on the business side though. So the sales org, the whole business organization is like overtly like liberal, woke, feminine. Anyway, so that was, not the most fun. McKinsey was incredibly professional. I really appreciated I was, was it square peg in a round hole? At that time in my life, I was newly single for the first time in like 7 years or something after dating my college girlfriend far too long. And I was like, had moved to New York for this job with McKinsey. And the last thing I wanted to do was leave town Monday through Thursday. So I got out of that as soon as I possibly could and opened up a restaurant nightclub and started my private equity consulting business.
Wow. So you were really taking the bull by the horns, opening up your own club. I mean, like, if you were single, that's like a lot of fun. So
I was almost terminally single from like 26 to 32. And then I met my wife.
What does that mean? Terminally single? I'm
like it was going to kill me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I got rescued. I got rescued by my wife. Basically, she pulled me out of the scene and gave me a reason to, focus on lower time preference activities.
Well, I've heard that about New York. What is it about New York that makes you sort of like just like party really hard, almost to the point of death? Because you're not the first person to tell me that.
I had actually left New York. The restaurant nightclub was in Chicago, and my private equity consulting thing was in Chicago, and I actually joined Google in Chicago. But yeah, similar. I learned how to do it in New York, and then I exported it to Chicago. Chicago in those years in particular, kind of like the middle of the aughts into kind of the early teens, where it was a really fun time in Chicago. There was so much money everywhere, which is why I kind of understand what's going on in the whole crypto space the last few years, because I saw it once with people that really didn't have the merit to make the money that they were, but because they were in Chicago and they were doing options trading during the options boom, and all the black box stuff. And this was like, Flash Boys, that was that time. So the fastest comms line from Chicago to New York was who won with the black box trading and the the super fast algos and all that kind of stuff. So that money was just like awash all through Chicago. Something else that was kind of fun is like Chicago's probably the biggest city that doesn't have an extra stratified layer of society on top, right? So like the private spaces with the celebs and the rich people are not accessible to the normies in New York or in LA. But in Chicago, there is no extra layer. So if you're like out and about and you make six figures and can afford the drinks, like you're hanging out with Michael Jordan, which makes it super fun.
Well, so let's go back a little bit because I want to pull on this thread about this options trading and how, the city essentially was awash with money. What happened there? Can you describe the options boom? And I don't really know anything about it.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't a trader myself, but, if you were kind of in the mix and, River North and Gold Coast and Chicago in, 2005, 2003, probably through the financial crisis. So 2003 to 2008, there were just a lot of young, cool people with shit tons of money. So, there was just like fun boats and private planes and trips to Vegas, and everybody's in Miami every weekend all winter, and, plenty of funding for all new nightclubs and restaurants, and just kind of this rolling party. And then Lollapalooza came, I think, in 2006. And so those first 3-4 years of having Lollapalooza there in the summer as kind of an anchor was really cool, with everybody coming and kind of experiencing this boom. Crime was way down at the time. Obviously, it's skyrocketed since, and it was just kind of a boom time for that city. Kanye was everywhere, being super popular, talking about Chicago all the time. Like, it was just kind of, it's when that city kind of peaked, and it was cool to be there at the time.
Well, so you're saying that there was all this money from the options boom. I'm trying to figure out where that came from. Was it because of, figuring out how to repackage them, or what was going on? What made all this money flow in?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was just, that was where people first started doing high frequency trading with options and futures was, you wanted to be right next to the SIBO and the CME so that you'd have the fastest comms time. And then sometimes you'd have somebody in the pit too, to, carry out special trades or operations or something like that. So a lot of these firms, the Citadels and all these guys that started in Chicago, Gecko, Third Millennium, they all kind of started there around, just right there in the loop, to have the fastest round trip times for their trading. Anyway, it's not my world. I just kind of witnessed it from afar and had a lot of friends working in that industry. But yeah, that's when the ARBs were highest. And then it got ARBed away, little by little. It just there were so many participants, and the boom kind of went away over time. And I think, 2008 was the last time, some smart kids a few years out of undergrad could, 10x their money in a year or something like that.
Well, so you were around at that time, and you mentioned earlier that you have a much better understanding of the entire crypto space because you were there at that time. What was it about that time that you remember that you can sort of analogize or make an analogy to?
Well, it's a lot of the same participants. Right? So Jump is in Chicago, and that's how they grew up, and they were doing algo trading and options, and it's still around. I was aware of Jump because they were investing in startups when I was at Google. So I would see Jump people at startup events and everything. And, they're probably made more money than anybody last year. I think they made $8 or $9 billion last year, doing market making for Luna and UST and all the other stuff they do, and I think Cumberland has a big office there. There's a bunch of these guys that are kind of at the center of crypto in Chicago, because all that infrastructure and all that talent base has always been there. And then there's a big diaspora of people that left Chicago and went other places after the option boom was done. And they recognized that, there was boom time coming back, and they got into crypto. So I've got a friend who made a killing on options, and then, traveled and hung out, opened CrossFit gyms, got jacked. Crypto comes around, He's running the desk for Cumberland up in Montreal for 3 years. And now he's starting a crypto hedge fund, So I think it's just, there's a lot of ad tech people in crypto. There's a lot of trading people in crypto that come from traditional trading and prop trading. And then I think there's a lot of people with online poker backgrounds and online gambling, right? Just people. I think those three groups from 15 years ago are all over the crypto space.
And were they all in Chicago at that time, or is it just that?
No. Ad tech was much more like SF, LA, New York, and Russia. There's a lot of similarities with ad tech and crypto because the big scam in ad tech is that there's limitless ad inventory on the internet, right? So how do you make something that's limitless seem scarce? You have to market the shit out of it. Does that sound like crypto?
Yeah, it does actually. Yeah. Huh. So you observed all of this, and then you went over to Google, had this interesting experience. What made you, I guess, go into startups of all things? So why was that super interesting?
Yeah, again, I think it was just, having seen what happened with the global financial crisis, and I just didn't want to be I didn't want the sand shifting beneath my feet. I didn't want to get rug pulled. So I figured if I had like a diverse set of activities in early stage companies where I could affect the outcome through the force of like my ideas, my networking, my strategy, my effort, then I could control my own destiny, which is what I really wanted to do.
So you went to basically be your own boss or something like that.
Yeah, starting in 2013.
Okay. So tell me about like what your experience, I guess, as a VC was, or an angel investor, or whatever you want to call yourself.
Yeah, I would say I was like an angel investor and advisor, basically, which I am still to this day. And, it's funny, in retrospect, what I realized I did is I actually had a full 7-year apprenticeship, because I sought relationships with founders that I was impressed by. I worked almost exclusively with product and engineering focused founders where I could complement them a little bit. The niche was great because I always worked with like series, seed and A startups, occasionally like a B, which was the time when they couldn't afford to bring somebody like me on full time, or I would have been like a co-founder, right? And it would have to be like a full-time thing, but they needed some of that. So I would work with, 3 to 6 companies at a time for varying chunks of cash and equity, and just help them get to the next level. Sometimes I'd work with a company for like 3+ years. Sometimes it would be 6 months, whatever, but I'd be kind of just helping get them to the next level.
And what was your role in helping them? What were you bringing to the table for them?
So I think it was the strategy toolkit, which I'd been developing obviously since business school, and then working at McKinsey and doing I did 7 years of management consulting, basically, including the private equity stuff. So 9 years basically of strategy work. And I had a strategy role at Google. I was strategy and operations for about $2 billion of sales across 17 teams for those 2 years. So yeah, I think it was that just means looking across all the functions, thinking about, where you're trying to get to, thinking about what you need to have in place to be able to get to those goals, positioning the company, what's your messaging, who's the right investor, what team member do you need now versus putting it off for 9 months? How do you think about fundraising and who's going to do the round after that? Should you do a safe or a convert right now? What are the benefits of each? Should you do a priced equity round right now or wait a little bit? Should you announce this product now or not? Should you hire this PR firm or that PR firm? Like it's everything. I just restricted it by, I will only be in a meeting that the CEO attends. So I would never get involved with a function, which basically put a constraint on the level of issues on which I would work. It had to be important enough for the CEO to want to talk about it and meet about it, or I wouldn't work on it.
I see. And what did you see there did you like it? It sounded like you liked it.
I loved it. Yeah. It was crazy fun. It was really lucrative. I ended up, I think just because I just was trying, I don't think I was like, I was really worried for the first few years that I would have adverse selection. Like if these people if they need my help, does that mean they suck? Right. And so am I going to end up with this portfolio of, shitcoin startups, basically? And basically what I realized is that actually I really ended up working mostly with founders who'd had previous exits and who actually understood the value of going much faster, and that doing something 10% better can have like a 10x delta in the outcome. And so they, especially in the early days when they didn't have this full team with a full C-suite and a bunch of VPs and everything, like having somebody that they could just talk to about all of the issues related to the company was really valuable to them. So I ended up working with a lot of more they were always kind of on the older side, almost always like 35 plus, like 35 to 45. And, kind of just a really respectful and kind of deep relationship and partnership with these people. And, it's interesting because I was still doing it when I got into Bitcoin, right? I was still taking clients and taking equity for advising. Like I spent 6 months at the tail end of 2019 all the way through April of 2020. Like I think we severed my contract and my equity vesting with Unchained Capital on like April 15th of 2020, which was like 15 days after Swan launched. But wow. I've been working with Joe, 3 times a week, just working on Unchained issues back then.
Well, all right. So let's get to your Bitcoin origin story. You're in the startup world. You're advising a lot of different companies. You're helping them out, and you're spread actually kind of thin, right? Because you got 6 different companies. You're doing a lot of stuff. What got you interested?
The price run up, and no, I mean, so I'll tell you, it was very clear. The signal that got me into crypto was super clear, and then we'll get to what made me start looking at Bitcoin specifically and made it rise above the rest. It was May 26th or something like that, 23rd or 26th. It was, I think, the first day of consensus in New York. I was in LA. I had a call scheduled with a guy who had, one of the best seats in venture capital, as far as I could tell. He was like the sole deployer of capital for one of the Didi Kuwaiti founders over in China. He was a guy from SF. And he could cut checks basically of like 5 to 50 million on any deal that he liked with an investment committee of 2.
Oh, wow.
And the guy was in China. So he basically just operate out of SF, just have coffees with people, find deals he liked, no overhead, no investment committee, and, 20% rip on profits for these deals he did with the guy. I was like, I always thought this guy had the best fucking job. And so I call him, and like there's so much noise in the background, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, sorry, I quit. I'm running business development for this crypto company." I'm like, "What?" Anyway, it ended up being, what was the project? It was Seven Waterhouse's thing, Stephen Waterhouse. What was it? Mesh Labs, I think back then. I think they renamed it Orchid. Anyway, and I was like, if this guy's leaving what I thought was the best job to not even go be the number 1, but be like the number 4 at this other thing, what's this other thing? So then I started just pinging people in my network and trying to figure out what this whole crypto thing is, started reading, downloaded Coinbase and bought some Bitcoin like almost immediately. I think before the end of May, I bought Bitcoin at, 3K or something. And, was just starting to learn. I got really lucky. And this was kind of, at least there was an inkling that Bitcoin might be special, because who did I hit up? Somebody connected me to Tucker Waterman, who was like a crypto fund manager out here in LA. Very Winklevoss looking dude, tall, probably went to Dartmouth or Harvard or something. Anyway, they had just run, like $1 million up to 17 million in like a year before I met him and like a real estate buddy of his. But he was like, you got to go to China all the time. You got to figure out who's like pumping things, and you need to start with Bitcoin, and you should read Digital Gold. And so I read Digital Gold. And so that was like the first thing. I didn't get into Andreas until after meeting you. I didn't find Andreas until what was that? So we met at let's just roll right into that. So I'm not working in crypto. I'm reading. Reading blockchain books by dumbasses and thinking that it's real. I'm like searching around, like, what's going on here? How does this work? I finally God, how did it work? Somebody knew. Oh, I know what it was. I was working on a startup, and the startup wanted me to meet the BlockV guys because they wanted to do something with like their NFT thing. This is like October of 2017. And so I go down there. They're impressive guys. They had like 5 CTOs, guys that had run huge divisions for European telecoms. Like there was nothing to indicate to me without knowing what crypto was that this wasn't like a totally legit pursuit. You know, like it just seemed as real as anything else I was doing in startups. And then the next meeting was like probably the end of September. And the guy, it was Eric Poulier, who was one of the 2 guys running BlockV, and he had us meet him at his apartment down the street. That apartment was the penthouse on Ocean Avenue that he had lent to Brock Pierce to run DNA out of. And DNA was like, it was starting like that week. That's when it was starting, basically. It was like the last week of September. And he had gotten this guy, James Glasscock, who is a great dude, really nice guy. And kudos to him for getting the F out, 5-6 months later. That guy had been like, executive at Warner's and a bunch of the studios and built huge teams. And he was like kind of a full stack human, cares about people, like very empathetic, like very nice guy. And that's who was running this thing. Brock really wasn't present. I met James. I liked him. I was already angling toward consulting for BlockV, which I did. I think I started there mid-October, probably. It was either mid-October or mid-November that I started consulting to them, like helping them figure out how to spend the $30 million or whatever that they'd raised in their ICO. And so I started like trying to angle, like, is there something that I can do here? These guys are raising money. There's lawyers all over the place. This feels kind of solid. You don't, until you actually get into the factory and see how the sausage is made, it's very hard to it wasn't then, because there was no Marty podcast. There was no Stefan podcast. There was no Safe Book. Like there was nothing really out there except crypto noise that I could find. I couldn't find any of this Bitcoin signal at the time, and nobody took me aside to explain it to me. So I remember a couple things. I remember one day there was like a bunch of people up in the penthouse. Maybe it was like before Burning Man or something. So everybody comes to LA before they go to the desert. And one person who clearly understood Bitcoin listened to my dumbass pitch about friction tokens and explained that friction tokens are stupid and can't work. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I have to throw away the last 4 months. Great. So that's nice. And then within, I think, it was, what was that guy's name? Kurt Kumar?
Yeah.
BlockCon.
Mm-hmm.
So BlockCon 2017, I've told this story on podcasts before, but I've never told it with Jemmy. So this will be fun. I really got to dial it in. And like, I'm going to try to make this like, it's very dramatic in my head. I actually have like mental images and very photographic memory of this whole thing. So this conference is at the airport museum at the Santa Monica airport. And it's a blockchain conference, and there's like blockchain speakers. I'm pretty sure Celsius, I think Alex was there pitching his Celsius ICO under false pretenses. And
wow, it's that old? I didn't realize.
He pitched it in either 17 or 18. I went both years. I went 2017 and 2018. I think he was pitching his ICO in 2017 because he had to have raised it in 2018 before the bear market. So I think he was pitching it in 2017. Anyway, so yeah, I think that was part of his roadshow for sell token, sell your sell tokens, guys. So I think it was it a 2-day thing or a 1-day thing? I can't remember. Might have just been.
It was 1 day.
It was just 1 day. Yeah. So I get through the morning. I'm like, going to different booths and learning about like fucking Bermuda shell companies from this guy and like, some amazing token economics on this insider deal over here. And like, listening to like, intellectual people talking from the stage talking about things that I don't understand that feel fairly jargony, but hey, it could be. Fuck do I know? These people have a lot of money. Geostar is rolling around in her platform heels and like a V-neck down to her past her belly button. Not kidding, but she was actually there. I don't know if you remember that. Anyway,
I totally remember that. Yeah.
So
yeah.
At some point, it's probably like lunchtime or whatever, and I don't know if I grabbed the stupid lunch or what, but I go outside and I'm like, it's nice, it's sunny. There's this big lawn with like a plane up on stilts out in front of the conference center, and I'm kind of just looking around. There's people in different groups or whatever, and like this one group caught my eye. It was only like two or three. It's probably three people in a circle, and one of them has this cowboy hat on. And I see him looking at two different people like that are elsewhere around, just with fucking daggers coming out of his eyes. Like he just kind of wishes that he could just, like maybe this was the old days and he could just, run him through right now. And I was like, well, I find that very interesting and attractive. Let's see what this dude's about. That clearly has some true loathing and hate for some of the other people here. There's signal in that. And I came over and introduced myself and probably said some dumb shit about crypto. And you were like, well, I've got a show. I really like Bitcoin. you should really take another look at Bitcoin and try to go deep on that. It really is like, you were so nice. Like, we're not as nice anymore. I get that. I'm actually worse than you now. But back then you were very understanding of, I think I was just like probably, rather earnest and probably pretty open, because I usually am. And I was kind of laying it on the table what I thought. And you were just kind of like gently redirecting me, but very firm that I needed to spend a lot of time on Bitcoin. And then I started watching you and Tone over the next few weeks. And that led me to Andreas, because you guys would always talk about Andreas. And then I went down the whole Andreas rabbit hole. And it took a while, because there was so much activity going on in crypto for me at the time. I was working on that Everpedia deal where they took the 30 million for equity from the new Galaxy EOS fund.
Right.
So they would build on EOS. And then, it finally hit. I don't know what the last thing was, but like by like the third or fourth week of March, I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to read another white paper again. I'm so done with this. But I was like, James had just left and Brock and Scott asked me to run the thing, basically to be president and CIO. And Dave Seamer, who runs Wave Financial now, who was one of my classmates from Chicago, was thinking about coming over as CEO, which he did by like May. And I didn't want anything to do with the fundraising and the ICO stuff anymore, but they let me start a consulting company, which I was like relatively, like a consulting division, which I was relatively okay with. Like, let's help these guys spend this money. And I also didn't have to do any of the work. I just had to like hire the team. So I basically, it was probably by end of July. I think I just like left at the end of July. So it was probably like the first week of August that I was like finally done. Oh, I know what it was. I tried one last gasp. I was like, I like this money. This money is great. Can I do a Bitcoin ecosystem fund under this brand? And I tried, and I was actually working with Steve Lee, Moneyball, who's at Spiral, and Dan Held, who I had met, and a couple other people trying to do a Bitcoin ecosystem fund under the DNA brand. Would have been a slight mismatch. Anyway, and that clearly wasn't going to happen. And so I left, like beginning of August. And as I do every summer, went to Turkey with my wife, where she's from. And when I came back, I was just dead set on doing something in Bitcoin. Didn't know what it would be, but I just wanted to do something in Bitcoin. And I was still consulting to totally non-crypto, non-Bitcoin startups, still working with SaaS companies and ad tech companies and stuff like that. But I was just dead set that at some point, as soon as I could figure out what to do, that I would do a company in Bitcoin.
It's interesting hearing your perspective, because I do remember LA BlockCon and just thinking, what did I sign myself up for? Because for me, that was the second conference that I was asked to speak at. And the first one was like just a month before in Paris. And it was what was it? The Breaking Bitcoin conference. And that was actually a really good conference because we're talking about Bitcoin only. There were some altcoiners or whatever there. And, I mostly just sort of avoided them. But, the LA BlockHand, that was just, I mean, I remember looking at the program and going, wow, they're clearly selling something. They're selling something. They're selling. And I went through and I was like, I think it's just me and Tone that are Bitcoin people. I was like, how did it end up like this? And literally everybody that came up was talking about an altcoin that they wanted either my opinion on or like something like that. So for me, like that whole thing was just like my education into, okay, so this is what the altcoin space is like, because they were like every single presenter, it felt like was a timeshare presentation, right? Like it's like, what are they trying to sell me? And what do I have? Like, I just, it just felt so dirty. I mean, I did give my presentation and so on, but it was just kind of, it felt so out of place. I don't know, like, was it like that for you? Or was it just like my impression was completely off? I like, for me, like watching that, it was just so, and I think you detected.
I didn't know yet that altcoins were bullshit. So it looked like startup pitches to me, and I thought the market was hot. And you look at like product, market, team, and timing. It seemed like this stuff was like on the come, so timing is good. Market is hot, so check. So then I was basically just looking at like, do I like this founder's personality and are they smart? And, do they have a good product? I was completely incapable of evaluating the product. If I had, I would have run away and just started working on Bitcoin right away. I just didn't know shit. So I was basically so that was a big question mark. Market and timing were good. So I was just basically looking at, founders and seeing like, okay, is this somebody I'd like to spend time with? Are they smart? And, are they earnest or whatever? Do they have like a real plan? Are there red flags or not? And there were tons of people that had like tons of red flags, but I see that in startups all the time too. So just because there were lots of scammers raising money for things that, obviously weren't going to work, that didn't signal to me for another few months at least that they were all bullshit.
It's so interesting to me because I think I had that same conversation that I had with you with like 20 other people that same day, right? It was just
maybe you were patient zero for Bitcoin in SoCal.
Maybe, I don't know. I remember saying similar things to nearly everybody that I met because so many of them would be like, hey, like, what do you think of this token or that token? And I get asked to like go review a white paper or something like that. And I'd be like, okay, if you want me to do it, I will, but you can't use my name or likeness. And I'm going to charge you some insane amount of money. And some of them actually were like agreed to do it. And I was like, you sure about this? Because I'm going to rip this apart. And they're like, no, we want to know. And I would rip it apart and give them the report and they would be depressed afterwards. It was kind of, it was such a strange dynamic. But like that whole conference just felt I felt like I was in Wonderland a little bit. And it's like, what is going on? Like, how are all of these people not seeing what I'm seeing? Because you read the white paper and it's like, that's clearly not going to work. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. How are you supposed to do something like that? And they throw the word decentralized around like you can just conjure it up out of a hat or something. It was so let me ask you this way, like when you started evaluating these things and when you'd read a white paper, I guess back then, like what were you seeing, or were you not really reading the white papers and were you using other signals to figure out?
I wasn't really going, I mean, I didn't understand the technology and I wasn't going very deep on it. I was basically just like, in some ways, this is probably, I don't know if I've ever put this together. In some ways, my training because I was doing like strategy and fundraising, advising in startups, the kickoff point for each of those is like, where do you want to be in a couple years? And it's usually tied to a funding round, right? I would get involved with like a post-seed company And I'd talk to the VC and the founder, and they'd be like, in the next 18 months, we want to get through an A round, and we want to be like, maybe get through a B round or be teed up for a B round or something like that. And so I'd kind of work backwards from that. And so it's funny, I was always kind of looking like, how is this positioned to be able to raise money? So my skill set and my background and like my frame of reference was almost perfectly suited to put blinders on the sides of my eyes and only be thinking about like, is this something that I could raise money for? I was like almost a perfect tool for that. So I think that's probably what it was, like, because I wasn't going deep and like diligencing these things. And a lot of the times, even before that, when I was just working in normal startups with, ad tech, SaaS, marketplace type stuff, a lot of it was based on like, do I think this is somebody that I can cross with my network, that I can shape up, that I could help, get over the line to actually raise money, raise a $20 million B round or a, $3 million seed round or something like that. I need something to work with, right? So yeah, I think I was probably a little bit confused by that background.
Well, so what was it that actually really turned you from an altcoin crypto guy to a Bitcoin maximalist? What was the
I do remember a scary speech from Clayton, the then chair of the SEC, in March of 2018. So I remember that being like one of the nails in the coffin. But I think mostly, honestly, it was just a lot of listening to your pod, your YouTube stuff, and then a lot of Andreas, and just kind of appreciating Bitcoin. So for me, it was actually more economics. I don't even think that I necessarily needed to say, oh, that's all crap. What I became enamored of Bitcoin, and where I got to is I thought the eventual market cap of Bitcoin would be like 100x everything else combined. And then I also had a lot of, it was a big thing in the teens in VC and startups to complain about being dependent on a platform, right? And that you didn't want to build on somebody else's platform like Zynga on Facebook, and they can just tank you whenever, or your business is entirely reliant on like the Google search algorithm. They changed the algo that actually tanked like an entire team at Google that was doing like search arbitrage for ask.com and Ask Jeeves and, Alta Vista and all those ones that were just sort of arbing Google traffic. And you'd see that team just like disappear basically. And so I was looking at it a little bit through that lens, and I was like, well, Bitcoin is the only platform here. I got that far by early 2018. I was like, Bitcoin is the only platform here that can't fuck you. And I was able to make that distinction between Bitcoin and Ethereum, at least, and everything else seemed worse than Ethereum. And then the Clayton thing, and then, the deep YouTube research, doing my own research on YouTube was starting to work. And I think I found like LTB, Let's Talk Bitcoin, podcast archives, and was kind of going through and picking and choosing episodes and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I just kind of got there. And the bear market makes you evaluate what you're doing too, right? So I owned a bunch of shit that I'd bought on Binance and had token grants from BlockV and some other places. And they're all of a sudden, down 70%. And, Bitcoin's down too, but it seems like it's kind of hanging in. Now all of a sudden I completely believe in Bitcoin. And now all of a sudden I've exchanged all of my shit coins for Bitcoin and not sold any Bitcoin. And that just started to align me. And then all of a sudden, like the rest of us, I just became one of Satoshi's automatons in service of the protocol.
Well, so what I find really fascinating about you, Cory, is that, I don't know, maybe it's because you've gone through all of it, but you seem to be able to spot the scams and sort of effectively talk about it very early. So can you tell me a little bit more about, say, like this whole Luna thing? You were speaking out against it like, okay, this thing is going to be a giant disaster. I mean, there's no shortage of altcoins that you could have gone after, but somehow you managed to pull this one out and say, okay, this one is going to be the one that's going to be really spectacularly crash. And you were right. What was it about that you saw? Like, is it from your experience? Is it some instinct you have? What was it?
Yeah, because you're right. Like, I don't actually go talking about altcoins at all. The only reason that I got interested in Luna in any way is because they did I hate orange washing. I hate affinity scamming. I hate, I love Bitcoin, buy my shitcoin. And I hate charlatans in the Bitcoin space with false narratives. So I saw that, plan of the Luna Foundation Guard saying that they were going to buy Bitcoin. And I saw a bunch of Bitcoiners, in particular, Pomp, pushing this thing super hard. And I just thought it was gross and disgusting, and figured Bitcoiners were just about to get used like they often are. So it just made me go a click deeper. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bothered, honestly. And then it started to piece together, because I'm still in BTC Nation, which you rage quit years ago. I've stuck it out. It's me and Clark and Dan. That's basically it. And I'd probably consider Brian Estes a Bitcoiner, the off-the-chain capital guy. And there's probably a few others that are like closet Bitcoiners that DM me sometimes, and they're like, "That was really good. I couldn't tell the group, but good job. Keep up the good fight." But it's so I still have some signal from the crypto world there. We use Prime Trust for legal custody at Swan, like us and Strike and a bunch of other people kind of have them as the the compliance back end. And so I talk to their salespeople, and it would come up here and there. I also keep an eye on, I open Delta app, a couple times a week, more when things are volatile, and just kind of see how things are moving so I can be eloquent if I need to be. And, since November, literally everything was in the red except for one coin that just was charging up the charts, which was Luna. And then you would also see the UST market cap going up. So that was also in the back of my mind. And it was like, oh, this one that's talking about Bitcoin now is the one that, is the only one that hasn't had a bear market like the rest. What's going on here? It took 45 minutes to spot the scam, maybe less. It was that simple because basically the thread that I pulled on was who benefits from topping up this reserve, this 20% on Anchor? Who benefits from that, right? Like, why is Jump and whoever else, why is Luna Foundation Guard, why are they putting money that's just draining, $1 to $6 million a day? They're just giving people this money. What do they get out of it? And that's when you look at they must be trying to pump the price of something over here with the other hand, right? And it's because they all had such, massive piles of free or cheap Luna tokens, and the market was interpreting a rising UST market cap, like more money stored in this algo stablecoin, as positive for Luna, and it would pump the price of Luna. It was actually high beta to UST. So UST would go up $1 billion, and the market cap of Luna would go up $2 billion. And so it was sitting there in the 40 billion something market cap for Luna. And these guys are just selling their tokens right into that pump. Right. And so they were just, doing a calculation. It's worth it to put another $1 billion of bribes into the Anchor reserve and pay it out at that 20% interest rate, because they can make way more money selling their free Luna tokens. So once I figured that out, I was like, oh my God, and that was before I even saw a video of Doke. And then I saw a video of this guy, on a podcast, and I was like, oh my God, this dude. And that's when I tweeted on April 3rd. And I got so much heat for this, man. I had people coming after me, Bitcoiners, by the way, not just altcoiners and Luna fans, but a lot of people coming after me after April 3rd, when I tweeted major Elizabeth Holmes vibes from this guy. I don't know the truth, but 99.99% of the time when somebody talks the way this guy does, he's a complete and total fraud. So I left a chance that he wasn't, 1 in 10,000 chance. And then, of course, all the national media that I've been doing lately, we've got Fox News and Wall Street Journal and all this crap the last week, is basically because I went on CoinDesk last Monday at 6 a.m. Pacific and predicted the collapse and said, basically it could happen today, it could happen tomorrow, might happen in a few weeks. If they somehow escape this, it's going to be bad for everybody, because it'll be 5 times bigger when it does collapse, but inevitably it will collapse. And then it collapsed 4 hours later.
Yeah, that was quite prescient. You do seem to have this sense of how to spot the scammer almost. I don't know if that's been fine-tuned since you've become a Bitcoin maximalist, or if it's a skill that you had before. What was it about Do Kwon that like sort of alerted
Well, it's a bit of both. I'd say, I started raising money in 2004. So I first started out raising money for like nightclubs and restaurants and real estate funds and film funds, like wherever I could get a finder's fee, just because I was out and about a lot and I enjoyed it. And I could put together a model, I could put together a deck. So it was just kind of like something fun to do as a result of having gone through business school that I couldn't do before. So it was fun to kind of flex that muscle and do it. I had a network now and I could get into money circles, and like it was just something for a little extra cash that was fun. And you'd get access to things like if I've had a great relationship with the guys that started 10 June for 18 years. And if I wanted to go to Catch this afternoon and there were no reservations, I could probably text a few people and get a group in there, because I helped fund their very first club in New York in 2005 or whatever. Right. So there's something about that. What happens when you're doing that is like you butt up against all the other middlemen. You get to know all the other people with deals because they're always trying to sell you on their deals. And then you meet all the people that are pitching things. And so, yeah, you develop like very quickly kind of a sense of like who's real and who's not, and who's a waste of time and who's not, and which guy will actually pay out and which won't. And like, you see a lot of shit, I mean, I got hit from like 3 different sides in 2007 in Chicago. At least 3 different people pitched me on starting my own hedge fund that would return 12% every year, and I could take a 1% on top of that. It was all Madoff. It was all rolling up to Madoff. Basically, at the tail end of that Ponzi, they needed so much money that they just like sent agents out into all the metros around the country and were just offering, any local celebrity, former athlete, whatever, you can get your friends into this hedge fund and you can make money off of that.
Wow.
So I saw a lot of that. And then, I think the other thing is probably just like, I threw parties for so long and I never took money for it. I was never a paid promoter, but I threw parties for a long time, starting in undergrad and all through grad school. And, I would just always like find a charity and have some reason to throw a party, somebody's birthday, somebody's whatever. It's just like fun to host. You have more fun when you get to control the guest list. You don't have to associate people with, you don't have to associate with people you don't like if you throw the party. And so I've always been kind of very selective about who I actually hang out with. And I want to throw a party with the right mix of people and the right ratios and the right music and the right venue and, all the right associations. And I pay a lot of attention to like the vibe and how people are getting along. And so I just ended up with like a very, it's not for everybody. It's just my taste. But what's good is because I care about how other people get along with each other. If you're at my party, you're going to like it because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I think that is something that, I don't want Mashinsky at my party and I don't want Do Kwon at my party. So if you like my taste, you don't have to like my taste. But if you do happen to like my taste, you're probably going to like all the other people I like.
So you detected in these people, I guess, like a weird vibe, and that was what sort of this is getting this going to be super spectacular in how it crumbles.
Well, with Do Kwon, it was the vibe was second. The first thing was just who's benefiting from this, and then you could spot the Ponzi really easily with the anchor thing. So that one was actually like ridiculously obvious, and I don't believe 90% of the people in the crypto space, all these funds and everything, that they couldn't see it. I think that they were just trying to keep it going as long as they could because they could lever up and, get 80% out of that anchor protocol. And, basically everybody was benefiting as long as the price of Luna kept going up. So as long as they could keep people buying Luna, they could keep making that money as long as possible. Very similar to like, if one shop has sold a bunch of out of the money calls on Bitcoin, there's some amount of money that they're going to keep throwing on leverage shorts to slam the price down whenever it gets close to where they've written most of their calls, right? Because it's an income strategy. You saw this in spring and early summer of 2020 when it was like, when the fuck is Bitcoin going to break through 12K? right? But there was like billions of dollars that had written call options above 12K that were just clipping that coupon. And so it was in the interest of like some of these funds and players to keep slamming the brakes whenever Bitcoin tried to break through. And that's one of the reasons that it ended up, coiling and springing up so violently when it finally broke through. It's because they'd been kind of suppressing the price for so long.
Do you think that's happening now?
I have no fucking idea what's going on right now. Like that kind of stuff is I only hear about that. I guess that one actually I did hear that was going on at the time. So I did actually tell people that was going on the time, probably tweeted about it in like May of 2020. But right now, this feels just like Fed tightening, macro, people that have way more assets than just Bitcoin and crypto have positions that are meaningful in Bitcoin. And so, when they're selling and they're going risk off, then it's happening to Bitcoin too. I think it's just, we've been heavily correlated with the Qs for like 18 months, the, NASDAQ index. And it feels like that's just kind of continuing for now. In the long run, it doesn't matter because at some point there'll be some kind of catalyst and the market will just catch and, Bitcoin goes to the moon again. But yeah, in the near term, it feels very just sort of correlated with risk assets and tech stocks.
Wow. So much to like unpack. You do have this very unique perspective of, I don't know, having gone through it. One thing I want to know is, do you think the altcoiners are different from 2017 versus now? Because I don't know, like it seems like at least when you were first getting into it, they were maybe a little bit more legit, and they, a lot of them seem, the people that you liked anyway, they seem to have gotten out of it as soon as they figured it out. Like, what about the people, like how would you compare the 2017 crowd versus the 2022 crowd?
Both sets are actually rather diverse. There were a lot of really obvious scammers in 2017, 2018. Particularly 2018, by the way, interestingly, even during the bull market, like that was when the worst of the sort of late arrivers got there and thought it was like a way to raise money for a startup. And they just had no idea what blockchain technology was or wasn't. So it was easier to kick them out of the pile. I didn't have exposure really to the earnest altcoiners ever, because I wasn't in Bitcoin in 2012, 2013, 2014. When some of these people that you could actually ascribe, like best of intentions to, like I obviously have gone back and picked up on the history from seeing, some of the ongoing conversations people like you have had with these folks over the years. And, there's kind of a grudging respect among many Bitcoiners for like things that, Roger may have done and then gone wrong, or Voorhees may have done well and then gone wrong or whatever. And like, there's some appreciation for the role that they played at the time, but I was not a contemporaneous peer to any of those people. And so I have got, it's interesting. It's because it's happening right now. Right. So like I've got somebody I've met through YPO recently who, is like left his company that he built and gone straight into DeFi, and he's like doing 2 DeFi protocols, but he doesn't understand anything about Bitcoin, and he's a full proponent of Keynesian economics, and he's never read a book on Bitcoin, but he's straight to DeFi. And I think there's a lot of people like that, and they all think that proof of work is doomed because the government's going to ban it, and they think that money supply has to increase to match GDP growth and population growth. And they have all these received narratives that I think are just pushed through crypto circles, or just because they've just never looked into Bitcoin. And I just, it's interesting. I think it's just a massive industry now. They had $40 billion of equity capital go into shitcoin companies in the last, 14 months or so, versus like $1 billion for NYDIG, 300 million for Blockstream. Everything else probably adds up to like 200 million. So maybe like 1.5 billion for Bitcoin in the last year and a half. But what the reason that doesn't matter is that you don't actually need startups to do anything for Bitcoin. Like it's good that there are startups and like we are building cool shit and serving needs and stuff, but massive companies adopt Bitcoin, right? And massive companies don't adopt shitcoins because if you try, like poor Alex and the Fidelity team doing 50 proofs of concept with blockchain and Ethereum over 4 years, were 0 for 50 and shut down the team. So we don't need that. Bitcoin always works as intended. And when companies get involved in Bitcoin, like the pilot works and grows and becomes part of their operations.
Well, so having walked from, I guess, altcoins to Bitcoin maximalism, what would your advice be to all the people like you described, the ones that kind of went straight to DeFi, are swallowing the Keynesian economic narrative and so on? What would you tell them, or how would you try to convince them, or would you even try?
Didn't I start a company specifically to do this? Isn't that the whole point?
This is true.
I mean, literally I think it was, the end of March, the end of March 2019, I had finally realized like I didn't want to do something with professional investors because I was first working on like a Bitcoin closed-end fund with Steve McClurg, the former Guggenheim portfolio manager who now runs Valkyrie. So I was working on that like fall of 2018, realized I'd have to go to Wall Street and like pitch this to portfolio managers who don't care. And I wanted people to care. And so I was like, you know what? I don't want to deal with agents. I want to deal with principals. That means it probably has to be like a website, and it has to be, one-to-many, use code and media. And this problem I was trying to solve is like, I wish that my shitcoin horseshoe had been shorter. I wish that somebody had taken me by the horns and pointed me toward the signal. I was ashamed of the 11 months that I spent fooled by crypto. And I was ashamed that the people that I usually looked to for signal, like Andreessen Horowitz and Union Square Ventures, whose words, I hung on their every word when they talked about market networks and SaaS companies and stuff like that, and that they were misleading people, whether they knew it or not. And I just wanted to try to make it a lot easier for people to find Bitcoin and find signal and get to the truth faster. So, basically the first product, as you know, and as you remember, was I want to combine a gift of Bitcoin, which I figured would give people some skin in the game and get them like watching the price and get them interested, with a year of education where they would, basically each month just get a new chapter of a book in 12 parts over their email. And that book would just be, written by the top minds in Bitcoin and just be like a great introduction to Bitcoin. And it was that simple. And I didn't have these grand ambitions for what that would become. I thought it could be like, it could kind of go viral, that it had its marketing kind of built in because people would, get into Bitcoin through a gift, and then, maybe they'd turn around and give Bitcoin too. And, even as late as like after the launch in November of 2019, I was looking at it, and because our prices were lower than Coinbase and Cash App, and you could give to yourself and you could set up a recurring purchase plan as a gift, 90% of the volume was coming from people that were signing up to give Bitcoin to themselves and just setting up recurring purchase plans for themselves with Give Bitcoin. So that was just hilarious. But I was at that point, I was the only person involved out of all the investors and everybody else working on it that wanted to do Swan. The only other person that wanted to do Swan at the time was Jan, who was an advisor and was just like kind of hanging out in the Slack, poking his nose into tech and products sometimes. And so then we got to chatting like the first week of December, and he was totally down for it. And I was like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And we decided to basically strip away all the gifting stuff and just, I came up with the Swan name the first week of January. And we got out quick because we had already there was no new functionality. We just needed like a new front end and like to skin it and work on the brand basically. So that's why we were able to get Swan out by the end of March, even though we didn't even like think of it really until Christmas.
Jan, yeah, he was a former student of mine, so always try to support him in whatever he's doing. But wow,
no, he was still blockchain consulting into early 2019 or something like that. I mean, I think he I think he basically quit blockchain consulting for like Chicago financial services firms when his book came out.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I do remember him publishing it and all that.
Brady used to punt shitcoins on Binance. Brandon Quittem used to do like marketing consulting for blockchain startups. Like, you know, like we all have our scars, man. I think like 5% of people, we totally do. The Church of Satoshi is real. We must repent. We might dunk some people in the Pacific at the Bitcoin conference in November. But how fun is that, man? I think you're coming, but yeah, November 10th and 11th, the Pacific Bitcoin Conference. It's across the street. It's across the street from where you and I met. We are doing the Barker Hangar. It fits like 3,000 people. It's just going to be so much fun. I can't wait for that.
Yeah. So tell me more about that. What are your plans for this conference? What's your vision for it, and how is it fitting into, I guess, the current ecosystem?
Yeah, well, I mean, it'll be the second biggest Bitcoin conference each year. That's kind of the plan, is to, you know, I think it'll be like probably 3,000 people this year, and we'd like to expand that up coming years, as obviously the Bitcoin Magazine conference will probably keep getting bigger every year. So yeah, I mean, I think if this one in size feels like Bitcoin 2019 in San Francisco, I think that'll be a home run. That'll feel great. And it'll be all Bitcoiners, no altcoin sponsors, no altcoin speakers. So I think that'll be kind of nice. I think there's a lot of good Bitcoin only conferences, but I don't think there's any that have like the budget that we have and kind of the plans that we have. We're doing it, you know, Bitcoin Magazine is the official media partner. They're bringing the Volcano desk and all their people, and like, it'll be super fun. Because of my just journalism background and facility with talking to media people, I'm friends with a lot of reporters now that cover the space. And so I think we'll actually have like a lot of mainstream journalists and journalists that write about Bitcoin will actually be conducting the interviews and hosting the panels and stuff. So I think the professionalism on the stage will be really good. And then otherwise, I think we're just going to optimize for having a lot of fun. So obviously the content's going to be fantastic. We're all going to learn a lot. But, you know, we're going kind of over the top on making it memorable. And I think anybody that comes out or comes down or whatever will make a lot of good memories from the time that they spend there. I want to throw a really good party. I know how to do that.
Well, I mean, you ran a club and you know how to throw a party. So I think given your background, this is right up your alley, and it should be really, really fun. Where can people find you? Where can people contact you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously check out swan.com. App is coming out finally in a few weeks. We just got approved by the Apple Store finally. I'm Cory Klippsten on Twitter, CoryKlippsten. And if you listen to Jimmy, this is already like people pretty far down the funnel. So you guys can all email me too if you have any questions for me or about Swan. It's just Cory@swan.com. And then, yeah, otherwise, I have a newsletter every day called The Daily Bitcoiner, which we've put together like the 1,000 best pieces of educational content about Bitcoin from the last 12 years. And so one of those goes out each day with a little intro. I'm just kind of talking about why I selected it. So that's cory.substack.com. And yeah, I think that's probably a good mix.
Mm-hmm. I'd say so. You have a lot of content, so that's awesome.
And if you want a job in Bitcoin, first take programming blockchain with Jimmy, and then go hit bitcoinerjobs.com and get yourself a job in Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's how Cory found his CTO. No, that's not exactly true.
That's not true.
I mean,
that's not true. I started, as a quick aside before we go, I started Bitcoiner Jobs because I was having a problem about a year ago, which was everybody was hitting me up looking for a job in Bitcoin. And like, if I like somebody, I have a lot of trouble not helping. And so it started to become like 20% of my time was like tweeting threads of candidates, trying to find them jobs, introducing them to other companies. I was like, man, I got to find something. So I was going to do something about it. And like, it was just kismet, man. Like within a week, I was on this random, like founder speed dating thing that some VC set up and invited me to. And the guy that runs Niceboard was one of the people I met. And it just is like a SaaS tool for making job boards for like any vertical or niche for like $30 a month. And so we just went hard at it, found Nathan, the guy that runs it for us, and it's now one of our product managers. And we got something out pretty quick, and it's obviously just like grown. Now we're actually completely building our own from the ground up because it's a real important part of the Bitcoin ecosystem. But yeah, it was just something that was solving a problem for me. And now it's just like seeing where it's gone is amazing.
Yeah, you've definitely lived up to your reputation as having your hand in a lot of things. So good stuff. Anyway, thanks for being on. It was a lot, and I can't believe it's been like an hour and 20 minutes almost.
Man, this was so fun. I can't believe I've never been on your show before, but hopefully it won't be the last time.
Definitely not. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Unchained Capital is a sponsor of this podcast. I'm an advisor to the company. I know the team well, and I'm excited for what they are building. If you need multi-sig collaborative custody or a Bitcoin native financial services partner, learn more at unchained.com. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Bitcoin Fixes This. Cory Klippsten can be found at Cory Klippsten on Twitter and cory.substack.com. Until next time, fiat del invest.